I recently watched a Google Hangout that had about a half dozen people involved, including my friend Steve Shives, whose post about it led me to watch it in the first place. I got there maybe 20 minutes in and watched it to the end of its 3 hour length. And it got me thinking, which is good because that's what these things are supposed to do. It's not really a secret, but I'm not going to name anyone else who was involved with this because I want to talk about the concepts that came up, not the people, which is something that a lot of people don't get, which is why so much discourse is toxic these days. If they want to be named, they can let me know, and I'll put up one of those annoying, stupid annotations most people don't know how to use correctly, or name them in the video description or something. Anyway, the discussion covered a lot of ground regarding religion and women's rights and empowerment and activism, but there was a disagreement that came up about 2 hours in that really left me thinking. Steve is really active on YouTube, and he's turned out to be a rather polarizing figure. Hey, you could have seen that coming 20 years ago, right, Steve? 20 years. Anyway, Steve and I tend to agree on a lot of things. I don't get his fascination with the awful movie Eyes Wide Shut beyond Kubrick's involvement, and I never got into pro wrestling, but these are entertainment choices. On things that actually matter, we sync up pretty well. Now, I understand that people have differing opinions on complex issues that have subtlety and nuance, and different people come at these things from different directions, different angles, and look at them from different perspectives. So I was expecting some disagreement on certain issues, and certainly there was some. But what surprised me was disagreement, I'm not sure how to put it, more in the nature of activism itself, specifically the desire, or even the moral imperative to try to improve things, versus the danger of making things worse, accidentally or unknowingly. I hadn't expected such a strong level of disagreement over this concept of responsibility, and Steve was advocating for it more. I transcribed a little bit of this so I could get the quotes correct rather than try to go from memory and screw them up horribly. Steve had recently done a video about 5 stupid things about Islamophobia, and the topic of Islam obviously came up with this, and some earlier videos he did that were a lot more critical and a lot harsher toward Islam. And in defending his more recent video and how he approaches these things, he said, it's great that we want to speak up against it, and it's great that we find it just revolting, the idea that people are treated so horribly under these regimes. Well, of course we do. But fixing that is a long-term thing, and one of the things I think that's necessary to fix it in the long term is to not further alienate those people and to not give them reasons to run further into fundamentalism, to encourage those more moderate voices in their own countries and to reach out and make friends with those people, and to make sure that we can find points of agreement and build bridges and be on their side. And when someone like me makes a video that is really, really super harsh on Islam, I had better make damn sure that I've got that thing exactly right. At this point, someone asked why, though, which is a kind of a badly timed question. I don't think she was really asking why you need to be accurate if you're being harsh on Islam. It was more just a general concern about having to be so accurate about things, and why he puts this much effort into the videos in general. I don't think that was meant as a question about why you need to be accurate when responding to Islam. But he continued, because it's a tightrope, because someone like me who has no experience in Islamic culture personally and doesn't know a lot about Islam in general other than the basic sort of objections that I have to it, I have no experience, I have no real expertise, and it would be incredibly easy for me to inadvertently say something in a video that my heart's in the right place, I think I'm saying the right thing, but it winds up being really, really damaging and harmful and counterproductive. And I agree with that 100%. I know that this actually does happen. I recently became aware of a situation like this myself. Various states have different social services: food stamps, medical assistance, domestic violence program, child and youth services, drug and alcohol recovery. Pretty much every state has these things. And in a recent training for a new job, it had come up an actual story that this the woman who was going through the training was telling us about. There was a person in Pennsylvania who wanted to help out on the on some of these subjects. He was aware that he was aware that problems existed. He wanted to address it. He had the means, so he decided that he was going to do something about it. So when some of the programs for social services that you have to reapply for came up for renewal, he made the decision to include the state-approved domestic violence pamphlet that explains how to recognize it and what resources are available and so on. He sent that out unsolicited on renewals. Needless to say, the complaints started coming in very, very quickly. People started reporting this. It started going up the chain. And this woman heard about it, got a copy of had somebody bring in a copy of what was sent, said, oh, geez, this is definitely a Pennsylvania pamphlet. We definitely approved this particular document. They checked into it, and they very quickly got that stopped. Now, this is somebody who was aware of an issue, wanted to help, knew that some women in the situation have no idea what resources are available to them, had a list of those resources on hand, and had a means to get that information to them. On the surface, it's logical, it makes sense, sounds reasonable. He was trying to help, he had only good intentions, everything looked right and reasonable and proper, and maybe a few people did benefit from this information being distributed. But people got hurt. In a situation like this, the abuser going about his day opens the mail and sees this pamphlet about domestic abuse, the sort of literature that the state up to this point distributed to people only on their request, and he knew he didn't request it. Yeah, we won't know ever how many people got hurt by this. But from the little feedback that came in, it was far more than were help, because he didn't understand the situation he was dealing with. He saw a solution, he acted. He had no clue what this looked like from the inside, what the realities are. So his actions, his good intentions, weren't good enough to justify his actions. There are plenty of tales of well-meaning people who made things worse, and the desire to make things better is commendable, by all means. But when people are hurt by these actions, and it happens repeatedly, as it does in some cases, you can't just give blanket amnesty on the grounds of, but they meant well, because meaning well doesn't mean enough. And in some contexts, we understand this balance of risk versus reward, that just because you mean well doesn't mean you can actually do something. If you're in a restaurant and somebody clutches his chest and falls over and his wife calls out, it's his heart, people will do what they can, they'll call the ambulance, but you don't see people grabbing a steak knife and a spoon and shouting, damn it, there's no time, I'm going to do the open heart surgery myself. If anyone tried it, they'd be rather emphatically stopped by everyone else, because people understand that any possible gain here is far, far less than the very likely risk. And that applies to causes like this as well. The guy didn't understand the risk of what he was doing. He sent out the pamphlets and he caused a lot of damage. And at least one other person in the chat did understand this and did defend the position that Steve was taking here, saying that let me get this one up as well. He's not saying you shouldn't make a video on a topic. He's not saying you can't do that. He's not saying that people who aren't raised in the culture can't. He's simply saying that because he doesn't have that kind of background, he feels less comfortable making videos on the topic. And I really don't think it's fair to jump at him and say you have to do that or else you're a hypocrite. At which point the moderator jumped in with, I totally fucking disagree again, that's absurd. Which I think that the complaint is absurd, but the person who was defending him continued, he's suggesting there's certain damage control, or there's a certain ratio he's concerned about, that if he goes out and makes a video, he's thinking, okay, there might be one or two people somewhere who hear something and it creates some good, but he's worried that while he's doing that, there may be 300 people or 3,000 people who misinterpret that or go too far with it or use whatever he says. He mentioned some of his earlier videos had more teeth than he'd wanted them to. They might then take that and it creates an increasingly xenophobic, an increasingly anti-Muslim attitude that just ends up getting vented on some moderate American Muslim, and he's just saying he doesn't feel comfortable personally making a video that might end up that way. And I can't get on board with this. You have to make videos about this, or else you're not doing this. YouTube channels are there to produce content you want to produce. I don't think it makes him hypocritical for taking some pause and saying, maybe I'm not the best person to talk about this, and I'm not going to be pleased with the results if I do. So I'm going to hold back, and if I hear things that I like from other people that are more qualified, then I'll bring attention to them, and I don't see what's so terrible about that. And the moderator said, well, let me illuminate and tell you why I think that's silly. The person defending Steve here gets it. He understands that if you help 5 people and hurt 50 in the process, you're not really doing good overall. Math is a hard thing to apply to things like this, but it's not a good situation at that point. Now, the moderator was not impressed with this. He did pay some lip service one sentence. I think that part of that's right, that if you don't have a good grasp on the material, you could end up doing more harm than good. What I'm not hearing is I need to learn everything I can about Islam. See, his position on this, he was saying as far as the empowerment of women goes, which is one of his prime focuses, he said, don't you think you would familiarize yourself with the avenues where you can do the most good? Don't you think you would familiarize enough with Islam, especially Islam, to make those videos to be able to speak about it intelligently and make it part of your MO? Wouldn't you do that if you believe that, or you just look at the simple fact that Islam is the #1 oppressor of women in the world? Wouldn't you want to do that? That's my point. My point is I don't think you're a bad person for not doing it. I think it smacks of particular hypocrisy if you're not willing to do the work in your activism to understand these points. And what I would say to that is certainly one way to do it. And it's perfectly valid, but it's not exclusively the only way to address the issue. And being the person to say, I don't want to be the person sending the pamphlet out, that's not hypocrisy, and it's sure as hell not apathy. It's responsibility. See, he's looking at religion as the #1 oppressor, supporter of oppression, and acting on it. Another person may be working at a policy level and making sure there are legal protections against these abuses at a national or local state level. Another may volunteer at a local shelter and make contributions of materials and manpower and monetary support so that victims of these things have somewhere to go. And another may not do any of these things, but when they see a guy pushing too hard for a woman's attention, they'll step in and say, look, you're being a jackass, knock it off. And all of these are valid and useful and necessary actions to support the cause, from the global culture to the national legal to the local assistance to one-on-one street-level interactions. And these individuals are all helping the cause in their own way, and none of them are wrong in what they're doing. And none of them deserve to be criticized for not taking action in the same manner or at the same level that the others choose to. This baffles me, and it's happened to me more than once. I have been criticized by friends for taking a position that they agree with because they feel that I'm not extreme enough or aggressive enough, or my choice of how to address the issue is not emphatic enough for their liking, and I do not get that. I want to say to people when they do this, these are allies. They're supporting the same thing you are. Why are you turning on them? Why are you turning on me? I'll help as far as I'm comfortable helping. That's progress. That's good. Don't demand more. If I or someone else is only willing to go so far with my opinion or my contributions, if this is what I can do, if this is what I know I can do and I'm confident about, and I'm not confident about doing more, accept that. As far as the expectation that you have to learn more about the subject to continue, sure, you need to understand what you're talking about, and if you're going to go further, then you do need to learn more, but that doesn't make going further an obligation. For example, I think it's terrible the way the homeless are treated in this country. It's a national disgrace, and I felt that way since we had to learn a bit about homelessness for a socialism class in college. And so I've read up on it. I have some understanding of it, but I don't really understand the larger picture of it, and I'm not going further on it or influencing policy or espousing certain positions on it because I don't know enough about it. I care, but I don't have enough impetus or enough motivation to make it a cause that I'm willing to learn about and spend time and manpower on and hours and it's just I'm not going to become Father Nathan Mugg. He's on Facebook. Look him up. I admire what he does. He understands what he's doing. I can't do that. I would be doing a disservice to the cause by attempting it. I know my limits, and I'm not going to go beyond them. A person can care about a cause without having to be an activist for it or without devoting themselves to learning every possible nuance of it. And they don't deserve criticism for it any more than you would deserve criticism for not devoting yourself to someone else's cause. People say everyone has a right to an opinion, but that's not quite right. Everyone has a right to an informed opinion. Similarly, people say that if you see a bad situation, you have a responsibility, a moral imperative even, to act. But more accurately, you have a responsibility to act responsibly. You're not going to try to perform the open heart surgery in the restaurant because you have some idea what the repercussions of your actions will be. Good intentions alone are not enough. Another person in the chat at one point said, if you reach one person with that, then it could get the ball rolling, and this is how the fire gets started. Which is true, but if you reach one person, you can still be hurting others. The fire doesn't necessarily burn in the direction you want, and you can burn the person you're trying to help. And being aware of that and acting with that in mind is not hypocritical, and it's not absurd. Another said, you can't be right all the time, which is also true. I agree with that 100% as well. But that doesn't mean it's okay to shrug and to not worry about being wrong. You have a responsibility to make every effort to be right when you speak, and here's the crux, to not speak when you can't be sure if you're right or not. An example came up in the chat, in the hangout, that if you see a woman being beaten in the street, you don't need to know the argument that led up to it to know that you should intervene. Again, 100% true. But it's also not the same situation because first, intervening, you know pretty well what the benefits are and what the problems can be coming in with that, or what's going to happen if you don't interfere. And so it's a fairly clear picture you have there. But you don't need to know the argument that led to it because the situation now exists regardless of how we got to it, and now it has to be dealt with. What Steve was saying is that he doesn't want to be the person that makes the video that triggers the argument that leads to the violence, because then he's at least partially indirectly responsible for that violence occurring in the first place. There's a big difference between reacting to violence and inciting it, even if inadvertently. One is stopping the abuse, the other's causing it. There was an undercurrent to what was being said in this chat, this position that was being taken, that I really felt was pushing for more forceful and emphatic support of the cause without demonstrating a whole lot of concern over how that could go wrong for lack of knowledge and hurt the people they were trying to help in the first place. The position that it's irresponsible to not act, even if you lack the knowledge or conviction to do so properly. And I see that as counterproductive and irresponsible at best. In the end, people who believe in the same cause as you will address it differently, and they can have positive impact even if they're not aiming as high as other people. These are still valid efforts. And if a person simply doesn't know enough about a topic or doesn't have the motivation to learn, then keeping quiet is the most responsible thing that they can do. Don't ask more of people than they can give. Don't criticize them for not doing it. Don't ask people to act in the absence of knowledge about the possible results of their action. And if there's any doubt in your mind about what you're doing, any concern at all that you may be making things worse, then stop. Don't make things worse in the name of making things better. Don't be that person. Don't send the pamphlet.